Hello, this is Steve Christiansen. Welcome to Restoring Liberty. This is episode number 6, being recorded on February the 6th, 2021. And as you know, Restoring Liberty, this podcast is where we focus on current issues through a framework and a lens that emphasizes limited government, personal responsibility, individual rights, and, of course, and most importantly, the U.S. Constitution. You know, I have found, I'm a conservative, and many of you that are listening are as well. Conservatives are sometimes criticized for being heartless. Some people even say, you don't care about people, all you care about is the economy, or rights, or liberty, or whatever. Quite honestly, that statement couldn't be farther from the truth. I personally emphasize the importance of limited government, personal responsibility, individual rights, and a strong connection to the Constitution, quite frankly, because it's been demonstrated time and time again that those ideals create the strongest, most enduring, and resilient society, which blesses people. That's why I personally focus on those things, and I will continue to do so. And this podcast is where we do that. And so, anyway, welcome to Restoring Liberty, episode number 6. As always, I have a lot of information that will be shared during this episode. So fasten your seatbelts and here we go. I will be giving you an update on the impeachment process. It'll start just in a few days on Tuesday, February the 9th. And in fact, we're going to spend some time actually reading President Trump's response to the allegations, to the charges, and talk about each one. And then at the end of this podcast, I will also spend some time talking about the truth about black history in this country. And I'm going to read a document to you, and we're going to pause after each paragraph and talk about how that truth compares to what we hear these days, which unfortunately too often is not true. And then at the end of this podcast, I'll share with you some exciting information. A guest that I'll be having join me in the next 2 or 3 weeks, who is one of this country's leading experts in terms of history and black history as well. And so I'll share that information with you toward the end of this podcast. Again, thank you for joining. I appreciate you being here with me. Before I dive into the impeachment update, I first have to ask a question to Mr. Mitt Romney, our U.S. Senator from this state of Utah. What in the world are you proposing? I don't know if you have heard, but Mitt Romney has made a proposal back in Washington, D.C. that caught me by surprise and probably a lot of people by surprise. In fact, I walked home, I came in the door from work one day and my wife said, "Did you hear what just happened?" And I had only heard generally. I hadn't dug into the details. And I have dug into the details since, and I am extraordinarily concerned. So, Senator Romney, what are you proposing? And quite frankly, what are you thinking? Let me tell you what it is that Mitt Romney has proposed. It's called a Child Benefit Program, or in his words, the Family Security Act. The Family Security Act is made up of a monthly payment to families with children. No strings attached. All you have to do is have kids. And the payment will be made up of $350 per month for each child ages 0 to 5 years of age, and an additional $250 per month for each child ages 6 to 17 years of age. Now, if you thought that there was a low income threshold to limit the participation in this program, think again. Unfortunately, those who qualify are those who have single incomes, single filers up to $200,000, and married filing jointly up to $400,000, if I'm understanding his proposal correctly. And on top of that, Senator Romney has also proposed reforms and spending increases to the Earned Income Tax Credit program. I simply don't know what he's thinking. Any program that reduces the incentive to work and interferes with this concept of personal liberty that we talk about on this podcast so often has to be avoided. It has to be avoided at all costs because it's un-American. If we're trying to avoid creating a sense of dependence among the people, the citizens of this country, the last thing we want to do is to start just mailing checks every month to people who, just because they have kids. I mean, don't get me wrong. We love our children, absolutely love them. We believe in families with children, absolutely. But this idea of just creating a new program to spend more money, no strings attached, and have those payments arrive every month forever. I mean, this program is intended to last forever. Is out of control. It's ridiculous. And I'm sorry, Senator Romney, I do not support it. I don't question, Senator Romney, that you are a decent person. I don't question that for a moment. But I do question your policies. If you are intending to accomplish things that will strengthen this country and strengthen the people in this country, I think you're headed in exactly the wrong direction. Democrats, for quite some time, especially countries who are very, very socialist, have been considering an idea called universal basic income for quite some time. These socialist countries have thought about testing such an idea. In fact, one of them has recently done it. In the country of Finland, starting in 2017 through 2018, they tested universal basic income specifically for people who were unemployed. The idea that they had was that by sending a check in the mail every month, to those who were unemployed, that it would help them get to the point where they could find work and become independent. Now that's a good idea, right? What happened is, after they measured the success of this program, they found that it provided no positive impact to them in terms of their ability to find a job, to go out and make it happen. There is a quote, however, from a study, and I'm trying to see if I have it here in my notes. It actually comes from Bloomberg.com, who comments on this pilot program in Finland. And this is what they had to say about it. A landmark study conducted in Finland from 2017 to 2018 shows that giving the unemployed free money doesn't provide the boost to the jobs market that some had hoped that it would. However, it does raise happiness levels. Well, of course it does. My goodness, you get a check in the mail every month without needing to do anything to earn it. I suppose that would raise my happiness level a little bit. At least it would remove some stress, wouldn't it? I don't know if it would necessarily create long-term happiness. So, Mr. Romney, I don't support your program. There is no way that we can do that in this country. We already have so many entitlement programs in this country, and those entitlement programs, in my opinion, do more damage than good, not only to the country and the finances of the country, but to the people of this country. Just like I said before, if we on this program and in our lives emphasize the principles of personal responsibility, limited government, and so forth, those end up being benefits to people, because we learn how to work. We learn how to do the things for ourselves that we can. Now I realize that there are some who are not able to work, or who have disabilities that prevent them from doing this or that. I get it. I completely understand. And maybe in those cases, some type of assistance is appropriate. And I'm not necessarily saying government assistance. In the early days of this country, in fact, I was thinking the other day, when the Mormon pioneers arrived in the Salt Lake Valley, 1847, there was no government here to take care of them, and I have to tell you Based on everything that I have read, they were pretty destitute. There was no government to take care of them. Yes, there was a church, and there were a whole lot of caring and generous people. That's the key. That's the key to a successful society. People with good hearts who are generous and kind and caring and willing to give and lift and support. Churches who are willing to pitch in and do their part. But I have to tell you, the more government does, the more churches tend to pull back, not necessarily intentionally, and the more that private individuals, the wealthy and not even the wealthy, tend to pull back, just expecting that government is going to take care of all of these needs for now and forever. This is not the right direction for our country. This is not the right direction for the people of this great nation. We get a sense of dignity and pride and self-assurance when we're able to work hard and fight and provide for our own individual needs and the needs of our families. And it also gives us a sense of great accomplishment when we're able to contribute to the needs of others around us. That's what we need more of in this country. I mentioned in one of my first broadcasts a book that I had written. This book is titled the same as this podcast, Restoring Liberty: The Battle to Save Our Constitutional Republic. In this book, the concept of personal responsibility, limited government, and so many of these other principles are emphasized. And what I'd like to do just for a second is read a couple of quotes from this book for you that I think are relevant to what we're talking about right now. This first quote is one from James Madison, a quote from the first U.S. Congress floor debate in 1792 after the Constitution was ratified and the first government was organized under that Constitution. He spoke of the danger to our liberties of an expansive and all-encompassing government, similar to the one that increasingly we are becoming. He said the following, and as I read this, I invite you to pay attention to the description that he gives of what an expansive, oppressive, all-encompassing government kind of looks like, and compare that to what our government looks like today. All right, here we go. If Congress can employ money indefinitely to the general welfare, and are the sole and supreme judges of the general welfare, they may take the care of religion into their own hands. They may appoint teachers in every state, county, and parish, and pay them out of their public treasury. They may take into their own hands the education of children, establishing in like manner schools throughout the Union. They may assume the provision of the poor. They may undertake the regulation of all roads. In short, everything from the highest object of state legislation down to the most minute object of police would be thrown under the power of Congress. Were the power of Congress to be established in the latitude contended for, it would subvert the very foundations and transmute the very nature of the limited government established by the people of America. In this book that I wrote, the next paragraph, I said the following. Mr. Madison, though he warned against it, described exactly what has happened over the course of many decades in this country. I'm sure you recognized it as I was reading his quote. And the consequences are increasingly apparent, not the least of which is a dramatic increase in dependency on government and a corresponding dramatic negative impact on self-government and personal liberty and personal responsibility. Let me read one more. This quote is more of an idealistic kind of quote, a quote that speaks to the best that's in each one of us. On page 35 of my book, Restoring Liberty, this is a quote given by a man by the name of Dean Alfange. He was born in Turkey and brought to the United States by his parents in 1902. But he captured this feeling of self-worth that comes as a result of hard work and personal decision-making when he said the following: "I do not choose to be a common man. It is my right to be uncommon. I seek opportunity to develop whatever talents God gave me, not security. I do not wish to be a kept citizen, humbled and doled by having the state look after me. I want to take the calculated risk, to dream and to build, to fail and to succeed. I refuse to barter incentive for a dole. I prefer the challenges of life to the guaranteed existence, the thrill of fulfillment to the stale calm of utopia. I will not trade freedom for beneficence, nor my dignity for a handout. I will never cower before any earthly master, nor bend to any earthly threat. It is my heritage to stand erect, proud, and unafraid, to think and act myself, to enjoy the benefit of my creations, and to face the world boldly and say, 'This, with God's help, I have done.' All this is what it means to be an American." Mr. Romney, I think you need to take that quote to heart. That is what it means to be an American, not to receive a check in the mail every month for the rest of our lives, having done nothing to earn that money. When we receive things that we haven't earned, it doesn't create the sense of dignity and self-worth. It does oftentimes just the opposite. Okay, I'll get down off of my soapbox now, and we'll move on to the next part of this podcast. Let me take just a quick drink here. What I'd like to talk about now is the impeachment process that is upon us. Now, some of you may say, "Gee, you sure like Donald J. Trump." And some of you may even say, I kind of liked some of the stuff that he did, but I couldn't care for him as a person. Well, I also liked much of what he did, but there were certain things that I didn't care for. In my first podcast, I shared with you some of the things that I think Donald Trump did exceptionally well as President of the United States. In fact, I personally believe from a policy standpoint, he was one of the more conservative presidents that we've had in a very long time. Not as conservative as I would prefer, but okay, yes, conservative. Let me just go through this list. He appointed originalist judges throughout this country and especially on the Supreme Court, 3 of them, an exceptional job. People who will read the Constitution, the words on the page, and seek to understand the meaning of those words back then, not try and apply some kind of imagined meaning from our day today. That's not what contract law is all about. And that's really what this is. The U.S. Constitution is the greatest contract ever written and ever signed. And contract law requires that the meaning of the words on the page be the meaning of the words that existed at the time that the contract was signed. And fortunately, President or former President Trump has appointed to the Supreme Court 3 people that we hope will do exactly that. President Trump moved the American embassy to Jerusalem where it belongs, which led to the first brokered Israel-Middle East peace deal that we have seen in decades. President Trump cracked down with firmness on China and other countries around the world that were taking advantage of the United States of America. He did that in significant ways from a trade standpoint, from an intellectual property standpoint, and so forth. President Trump, or former President Trump, cut regulation. He made businesses more capable of expanding and growing and so forth, and becoming more profitable. Now, again, I remind you Some of my Democratic friends would say, all you care about is the economy and money and profits. Do you know why having businesses become profitable is so important? Because it allows them to grow, to invest, and create jobs. And when businesses are creating jobs, guess what happens? People are blessed. Yes, I believe in a strong economy and growing trade and business because it benefits the people. President Trump cut taxes significantly, and as a result, he generated significant, there's that word again, economic growth. But that economic growth led to some of the lowest unemployment numbers that we have seen in a very, very long time. In fact, the overall unemployment rate was the lowest that we've seen in a half a century. And the unemployment rate among blacks, Hispanics, and other minority groups was the lowest ever recorded in history. Don't tell me that the policies of President Trump that he implemented to generate that kind of economic growth were not good. They were absolutely good. And wages rose among the lower and middle classes faster than we've seen them rise in quite some time. President Trump didn't start any new wars. And I tell you, that's the first president of the United States that hasn't done that for a while. He eliminated ISIS as a terrorist threat almost throughout the world. He got out of some pretty lopsided and unfair agreements, the Paris Climate Accord and the Iran deal. He improved a number of trade deals with countries around the world. He was one of the most pro-life presidents that we have had in a very long time. And he was willing to come out and stand for it, take that strong position. And personally, I, who consider myself a strong pro-life proponent, I appreciated his willingness to courageously stand for life. And then finally, with regard to the COVID management, the COVID response, he respected the rights of states. He involves states in the management of this response. What we're seeing now with President Biden is he's trying to centralize all of that again at the federal level. I can only say, if you don't take advantage of the people who are at the grassroots level, who really know what's going on, you're going to have some missteps and some problems and ultimately some potential failures. Now, were there things about Donald J. Trump that I didn't care for so much? Absolutely. We talked last time about the unconstitutionality of many executive orders. He used executive orders too much as well, in my opinion, and I believe that was contrary to the Constitution. He also spent way too much money. Both primary parties in our country today spend way too much money. We've talked about the kind of debt that this country is in right now. 28 going on to, oh my goodness, by the time this year is over, I don't know what it's going to be. It could be as high as 30 to 32 trillion dollars. And that doesn't even take into consideration the unfunded liabilities for Social Security and Medicare. When you add the net present value of unfunded liabilities to that 28 to 32 trillion dollars of debt, what do you have? About $200 trillion. That's completely irresponsible and out of control. Finally, I also didn't like a number of his tweets. Some of them I thought they were just completely obnoxious, and some of them fairly incendiary. So, mostly, I really appreciated President Trump's leadership and his policy. There were some things that I didn't care for. But I must say, when you compare President Trump to Joe Biden, even the moderate Joe Biden that we said he was going to be, or that he said he was going to be, I much preferred President Trump. And now when we see the real Joe Biden coming out of the woodwork, oh my goodness, there's no question in my mind that Donald J. Trump with 4 more years would have done a much better job. All right, what I'd like to do now, as I said, we're talking about the impeachment process. What I'd like to do is read President or former President Trump's legal team's response to the article of impeachment. And you remember that the article of impeachment was that he basically incited a riot. The rioters attacked the U.S. Capitol, and that he was responsible for that. I think it specifically talks about inciting insurrection against the government of the United States. So let me just turn our attention then over to that specific response, and I'm actually going to just read through it. I'm going to read fairly quickly, so pay attention. This is coming from Donald John Trump, 45th President of the United States, in response to Article 1, Incitement of Insurrection. So the first charge against former President Trump from the Democratic Party, the House of Representatives that impeached him. The Constitution provides that the House of Representatives shall have the sole power of impeachment, and that the President shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Some of those words are taken right from the Constitution. So his response to this first charge, he answers as follows: admitted in part, denied in part, as not relevant to any matter properly before the Senate. I'm going to kind of skip that language in the future. It's a little bit too legalistic, but I am going to read his specific response. It is admitted that the constitutional provision at Averment 1 is accurately reproduced. It is denied, however, that the quoted provision currently applies to the 45th President of the United States, since he is no longer President. The constitutional provision requires that a person actually hold office to be impeached. Since the 45th President is no longer President, the clause "shall be removed from office on impeachment for" is impossible for the Senate to accomplish, and thus the current proceeding before the Senate is, and then he goes on to explain in legal terms, basically legally null and void, and it runs patently contrary to the plain language of the Constitution. So he's basically making an argument that he can't be impeached. He can't be tried and convicted of impeachment and thrown out of office because he's no longer in office. He then references Article 1, Section 3 of the Constitution, which states, "Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy an office of honor." So what he is saying here by emphasizing the word "and," let me repeat that. Judgment in cases of impeachment shall not extend further than to removal from office and disqualification to hold and enjoy an office of honor. In other words, basically what he's saying, by that "and" being inserted there rather than the word "or," he has to be tried and found guilty and removed from office and disqualified. But he can't be removed from office because he's already out of office. And so since he's already out of office, that "and" makes the disqualification to hold and enjoy an office of honor in the future also unrealistic and impossible. He's already out of office. I hope you followed that logic. It's really important. Let me go on. Since removal from office by the Senate of the President is a condition precedent which must occur before and jointly with disqualification to hold future office, the fact that the Senate presently is unable to remove from office the 45th President whose term has expired means that Averment 1 is therefore irrelevant to any matter before the Senate. Yes, I know there are lots of big words in there, but basically what that says is what I just explained a moment ago. Since the Senate, even if they try him and find him guilty, which is unlikely, they can't throw him out of office because he's already out of office. And since he's already out of office, they also cannot deny him the right and ability to run for future office. Anyway, let's move on to number 2. Further, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution prohibits any person who has engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States from holding any office under the United States. So that's the charge. Charge number 2, levied or brought against Donald J. Trump. Here is his answer. It is admitted that phrases from Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to the Constitution are correctly replicated in Averment 2. It is denied, however, that the 45th President engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the United States. The 45th President believes and therefore avers that as a private citizen, the Senate has no jurisdiction over his ability to hold office, and for the Senate to take action on this averment would constitute a bill of attainder, and then a reference to the Constitution of the United States. Therefore, the 45th President asks the Senate to dismiss Averment 2 relating to the 14th Amendment as moot. Basically, what he says is there is no legal basis whereby this second averment can be found true, and so therefore President Trump, or former President Trump, is asking the Senate to dismiss it. Number 3, here's the third charge from the Democrats. In his conduct while President of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional oath faithfully to execute the office of President of the United States, and to the best of his ability preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, and in violation of his constitutional duty to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. Basically what they're saying is he was unfaithful to his office as President of the United States, and did not seek to preserve and protect and defend the Constitution of the United States. Quite honestly, I have to say, if this charge were to be brought against Joe Biden at this moment, after everything that he has done in the very short time that he has been president, just simply in terms of his unwillingness to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, in my opinion, he would be found guilty. Donald J. Trump's response to averment number 3, it is denied that the 45th President of the United States ever engaged in a violation of his oath of office. To the contrary, at all times, Donald J. Trump fully and faithfully executed his duties as President of the United States, and at all times acted to the best of his ability to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, while never engaging in any high crimes or misdemeanors. There's still more here, but I'm going to skip on to number 4. The fourth charge against Donald J. Trump. Donald John Trump engaged in high crimes and misdemeanors by inciting violence against the government of the United States in that, on January 6, 2021, pursuant to the 12th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, the Vice President of the United States, the House of Representatives, and the Senate met at the United States Capitol for a joint session of Congress to count the votes of the Electoral College. In the months preceding the joint session, President Trump repeatedly issued false statements asserting that the presidential election results were the product of widespread fraud and should not be accepted by the American people or certified by state or federal officials. So that's the charge. Here is President or Donald J. Trump's response. It is admitted that on January 6, 2021, a joint session of Congress met with the Vice President, the House of Representatives, to count the votes of the Electoral College. It is also admitted that after the November election, the 45th President exercised his First Amendment right under the Constitution to express his belief that the election results were suspect, since with very few exceptions, under the convenient guise of COVID-19 pandemic safeguards, states' election laws and procedures were changed by local politicians or judges without the necessary approvals from state legislatures. Insufficient evidence exists upon which a reasonable jurist could conclude that the 45th President's statements were accurate or not, and he therefore denies they were false. Like all Americans, the 45th President is protected by the First Amendment. Indeed, he believes and therefore avers that the United States is unique on earth. I love that. the United States is unique on earth in that its governing documents, the Constitution and Bill of Rights, specifically and intentionally protect unpopular speech from government retaliation. If the First Amendment protected only speech the government deemed popular in current American culture, it would be no protection at all. Boy, there is a lot of truth in there, isn't there? Since the 45th president is no longer president, the constitutional clause ad averment 1 above shall be removed from office on impeachment for is impossible, since the 45th president does not hold office and the current proceeding before the Senate, and yada, yada, yada. All right, let's move on to charge number 5. Shortly before the joint session commenced, President Trump addressed a crowd at the Capitol Ellipse in Washington, D.C. There he reiterated false claims that we won this election and we won it by a landslide. Personally, I believe that. After everything that I have studied and all of the evidence that I have reviewed, I think he did win it by a landslide, but that's water under the bridge at this point, unfortunately. Here is Donald J. Trump's response to that charge. It is admitted that President Trump addressed a crowd at the Capitol Ellipse on January 6, 2021, as is his right under the First Amendment to the Constitution, and expressed his opinion that the election results were suspect, as is contained in the full recording of the speech. To the extent Averment 5 alleges his opinion is factually in error, the 45th president denies this allegation. In other words, Donald J. Trump is saying, I stand by what I said. All right, charge number 6. He also willfully made statements that, in context, encouraged and foreseeably resulted in. Basically, what the Democrats are saying is, based on what he said, he should have known that people would have gone to the Capitol and committed lawless activity. So, and foreseeably resulted in lawless action at the Capitol, such as, and this is where we're quoting President Trump, if you don't fight like heck, and he didn't use the word heck, you're not going to have a country anymore. End of quote. Thus, incited by President Trump, members of the crowd he had addressed in an attempt to, among other objectives, interfere with the joint session's solemn constitutional duty to certify the results of the 2020 presidential election, unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol, injured and killed law enforcement personnel, menaced members of Congress, the Vice President, and congressional personnel, and engaged in other violent, deadly, destructive, and seditious acts. That's the charge. Donald J. Trump's response to that charge. It is admitted that persons unlawfully breached and vandalized the Capitol, that people were injured and killed, and that law enforcement is currently investigating and prosecuting those who were responsible. I'm going to pause there. I can't wait to find out exactly who it was that organized this, that led this, that encouraged this. Now, were there likely some Trump supporters in the mix somehow, somewhere? Yes, there were. That one woman whose life was lost, unfortunately, she was there in the Capitol, and that's where she lost her life. But I am very curious and interested to see all of the other parties and groups that were part of that incursion into the Capitol. I'll carry on here. Seditious acts is a term of art with a legal meaning, and the use of that phrase in the article of impeachment is thus denied in the context in which it was used. It is denied that President Trump incited the crowd to engage in destructive behavior. It is denied that the phrase, if you don't fight like heck, you're not going to have a country anymore, had nothing to do with the action at the Capitol, as it was clearly about the need to fight for election security in general, as evidenced by the recording of the speech. It is denied that President Trump intended to interfere with the counting of electoral votes. As is customary, members of Congress challenged electoral vote submissions by state under a process written into congressional rules, allowing for the respective houses of Congress to debate whether a state's submitted electoral vote should be counted. Now, I like this next section. So it was okay when it happened in 2017, but somehow it's not okay now. So let me read this next section. In 2017, Democratic members of Congress repeatedly challenged the electoral votes submitted from states where President Trump prevailed. In 2021, Republican members of Congress challenged the electoral votes submitted from states where President Biden prevailed. The purpose of the joint sessions of Congress in 2017 and on January 6, 2021, was for members of Congress to fulfill their duty to be certain the Electoral College votes were properly submitted and any challenges thereto properly addressed under congressional rules. Now notice that he's referring to congressional rules, federal regulation. He's not referring to the Constitution. The Constitution only talks about opening and counting the ballots, as we have seen in the past. Congress's duty, therefore, was not just to certify the presidential election. Its duty was to first determine whether certification of the presidential election vote was warranted and permissible under its rules. And those rules came, I believe, from the 1887 Electoral College Act. I think that's what it was, or Electoral Count Act or something like that. But if you remember, we talked in previous episodes about what Donald J. Trump's lawyers really wanted to happen on that day, January 6th, during that joint session of Congress. All they wanted Vice President Pence to do was to push the pause button for 10 days. Letters had been received from several states indicating that the state legislatures had questions and concerns about the integrity of the voting process and results. And they asked that they please push the button and give them 10 days to further explore and investigate and see if they were to end up invalidating the electoral slate that was sent and sending a different slate. Obviously, that didn't happen. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Charge number 7. President Trump's conduct on January 6, 2021 followed his prior efforts to subvert the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. Those prior efforts included a phone call on January 2, 2021, during which President Trump urged the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, to find enough votes to overturn the Georgia presidential election results and threatened Secretary Raffensperger if he failed to do so. Donald J. Trump's response to that charge. It is admitted that President Trump spoke on the telephone with Secretary Raffensperger and multiple other parties, including several attorneys for both parties, on January 2, 2021. Secretary Raffensperger or someone at his direction surreptitiously recorded the call and subsequently made it public. The recording accurately reflects the content of the conversation. It is denied that President Trump made any effort to subvert the certification of the results of the 2020 presidential election. It is denied that the word "find" was inappropriate in context, as President Trump was simply expressing his opinion that if the evidence was carefully examined, one would, quote, find that you have many that aren't even signed, and you have many that are forgeries, end of quote. It is denied that President Trump threatened Secretary Raffensperger. It is denied that President Trump acted inappropriately in that telephone call in any way. Since the 45th president is no longer president, the constitutional clause from Averment 1, so on and so forth, we've already read that. All right, charge number 8. In all this, President Trump gravely endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. He threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled a co-equal branch government. He thereby betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. Donald J. Trump's response to that charge. It is denied that President Trump ever endangered the security of the United States and its institutions of government. It is denied he threatened the integrity of the democratic system, interfered with the peaceful transition of power, and imperiled a co-equal branch government. It is denied he betrayed his trust as president to the manifest injury of the people of the United States. I would pause there and simply say, remember all of those riots that took place throughout our country during last summer, where about 30 lives were lost and $1 billion of damage were inflicted on government buildings and other private property. I wonder why Democrats who encouraged that kind of riotous behavior during the summer are having such a big problem right now. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment that what happened on January 6th was in any way appropriate. It was not. And those who perpetrated those crimes need to be prosecuted. And if found guilty, they must pay they must pay the price for the deeds that they have done. All right, let me go on. Let's see, where did I leave off? Rather, the 45th President of the United States performed admirably in his role as President, at all times doing what he thought was in the best interests of the American people. The 45th President believes and therefore avers that in the United States the people choose their President, and that he was properly chosen in 2016 and sworn into office in 2017, serving his term to the best of his ability in comportment with his oath of office. Since the 45th President is no longer President, the constitutional clause at Averment 1, and so on, and so on, and so on. All right, we've already read that. All right, that is the end of the charges and President Trump's responses to those charges. This trial that is going to take place in the Senate back in Washington, D.C., is scheduled to begin, I believe, at about noon on Tuesday the 9th. I believe that's when it's scheduled to begin. I would imagine there will be a lot of people attending this and watching from both sides of the political spectrum. I would imagine that the Democrats are going to take full advantage of all of the footage that was videotaped of the incursion into the Capitol, President Trump's speech, and they're going to cut and paste and try to identify specific words and video clips and segments to just inflame this country in an attempt to demonstrate the effectiveness of their charges. As the Constitution says and requires, it says that for a sitting president, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is to preside. However, John Roberts has refused to do so, or, well, we're not sure if he refused to do so or simply said, you know what, he's not the sitting president any longer, therefore the constitutional requirement that I preside over these proceedings no longer applies. If he can back out and question the constitutionality, my guess is that President Trump's argument that the proceedings against him are also unconstitutional. Anyway, the person that will be presiding over these proceedings is Democratic Senator President Pro Tem Patrick Leahy of Vermont. He's the one that will be presiding. There is nothing in the Constitution that speaks to anyone other than the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States presiding at these proceedings. So that in and of itself, the fact that he's not there and that Patrick Leahy of Vermont is there, another strong indication that this is unconstitutional, in my opinion. The House has identified 9 impeachment managers, is what they're called. They're actually congressmen and women, and they will first present their case. Again, as I said, it's likely to start on Tuesday, February the 9th, probably about noon. And it could take, I don't know how long, 2 or 3 days for them to present their full case. They prepared an 80-page brief that they have submitted and provide a copy to President Trump. After they've presented their case, Trump's attorneys will then present their case. If the Democrats have 2 to 3 days to do so, I would imagine that Trump would have about the same amount of time to present his case. And then senators on both sides of the aisle will probably have an opportunity to ask questions in some form or fashion. Witnesses may be called and questioned and cross-examined and so forth. Ultimately, there will be a vote.